Hi, everyone who is just logging on now. We're going to give everyone about 5 minutes to settle in on their technology for today's event. So we're going to start in about 5 minutes. Welcome. Hey, everyone, we're just giving folks another couple minutes to come on in the room for this conversation this evening. So we're going to start in about 2 minutes. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Crystal Haynes. I am the Events Working Group lead for the Arlington Human Rights Commission. I want to thank you for joining us for this moderated discussion on racism against the Asian American Pacific Islander community and how we can stand against hate, misogyny, and the fetishization of Asian women in popular culture and historical narratives. This virtual event will elevate voices in the AAPI community across the state and our Arlington community. It also provides an incredible opportunity to learn, to listen, and to take action to fight hate in all forms. Now, tonight's panelists, we're very excited to have all of these folks share their time, their space, their experience, and their great depth of knowledge in this. So I'm so grateful to introduce you to Karen Chen, the Executive Director of the Chinese Progressive Association of Massachusetts, Carolyn Chou, the Director of the Asian American Resource Workshop, Sam Hyun, the Chair of the Massachusetts Asian American Commission, and of course, Arlington High School's Asian American Coalition. And the students with us are Andrew Park, Samip Phuyal, Linda Zhou, and their advisor, Sein Park. So thank you all for being here with us this evening. We really appreciate it. And for the community, before we begin to unpack this issue, I want to remind everyone of our ground rules for maintaining a safe space for comments and learning tonight. We all have the responsibility to respect and build on the strength that diversity provides. We will engage in polite, constructive, and/or productive dialogue and feedback. We will respectfully disagree with each other if that happens. Unless you are a designated representative of an organization, opinions are considered your own. And when sharing a question, please be short and to the point. We want to use this moment in space to take some time to allow for self-reflection. So take deep breaths if you need to in order to sit with some of this information. And also for our community members, if you have questions for the panel, please utilize the Q&A box. I also want to let you know that the live transcription button, if you need closed caption, is available to you right at the bottom of your screen. Now, tonight's program is part of the town's month-long series of programs for Stand Against Racism Month, which is observed in April. And first, to talk about that, I'd like to invite DEI Coordinator for the town of Arlington, Jillian Harvey, to say a few words.
Great, thanks, Crystal, and thank you all for being here for this event. And to the panelists, I'm really excited to dive into the discussion with you all. And as Crystal said, this month, the town of Arlington is joining the Alliance of YWCAs of Massachusetts, their Stand Against Racism campaign for April. And so my division has organized a number of town discussions within departments. So they'll be holding these internal talks around race and how to advance equity and racial equity within their departments. So departments are holding small talks focused on some different pieces of curated content, but also topics of choice. And so they'll be exploring some issues around racial equity and how to really incorporate it into their work. And the progress of these conversations will be shown throughout the month. So we'll be adding a social media campaign as well in about a week once we've got some of our content posted. But I'm really excited that this is a part of that programming as we're trying to continue to raise awareness around racism. So I will pass it back to you, Crystal.
Thanks, Jill. We're really excited about this program that's programming for the town. For my first question, and again, if anyone in attendance has any questions, you put those in the Q&A. We're going to hold space for that in just about a half an hour. So we'll take questions from the community. But I want to start with this question. You know, many were shocked, were angered, were disheartened, were a myriad of emotions by the events in Atlanta. But we know that hate against the AAPI community has been present for generations. What were you all's initial reactions to those events? And what did you think of the immediate actions by those in state, local, and federal leadership? And I want to start with you, Karen.
Thank you, Crystal. I think that the initial reaction we heard about the incident in Atlanta is like, you know, I think for me, working in a community-based organization that, you know, where a lot of community members are dealing with day-to-day needs. So I'm feeling like, oh my God, more to deal with. That's kind of like the initial reaction. And you know, like a lot of, you know, anti-Asian racism or violence have always existed. I think that it's only now or at this moment, a different point in history, we have gotten, you know, attention. And, you know, I think that we're glad that there's spotlight in the issue. And we also feel like it's really important for us to look at, you know, some of the structural racism issues. That's mostly rooted in, you know, economic disparity. And I think many of the civil rights struggles are really aimed towards fighting for, you know, economic justice. And this this is especially important during the pandemic, because besides, when I say another thing to deal with is that because every day we've been hearing from, lots of community members in need of rental assistance or at risk of being displaced from their homes. People got kicked off unemployment, unsure why, and can't contact the unemployment office. People need access to vaccines so that they can go back to work. So all these are really real day-to-day struggles that, working families, working class families are dealing with. And since the pandemic, we're not talking about like small numbers, and the number is growing as the pandemic, have gone on.
Sam, would you build upon that for us?
Sure. I think for me, it was, like Karen, I think like Karen said, it's not new. And so it's a continuation of the perpetuation of violence, and specifically murder, towards the Asian American community. And I think America was having a reckoning, and it was, a lot of people were like, oh my God, this is like the first time I've ever heard about this. And it's kind of emblematic of kind of the way that Asian Americans have been seen and valued within this country, that we are an afterthought at best and erased at worst. And I think it's just for many people, when I hear and I heard, people in the government, people in positions of power being like, I can't believe this is happening, or this is such a shock. And it's just like, that just shows that they didn't care enough to know, to find out, to hear, to listen. And that really does capture the problem here, which is, had you been listening to the community, you would know that these problems are happening. You would know that the work that both Carolyn and Karen are doing, and how important it is, and how we should have been listening to them for a long, long time. And so I'm hoping that, now that people are paying attention, that they will see the work that both them and their organizations have been doing for many years, and finally listen when they speak.
Carolyn, speak to that in your work there.
Yeah, I mean, I think just one thing is, particularly with Atlanta, right? We see the intersection of race, gender, class, and immigration so clearly, right? And for those of us who, live at those intersections, it felt so visceral, right? And it felt like we knew that it was at those intersections. And, I think about the home healthcare workers that CPA organizes. I think about the nail salon workers in Fields Corner, the women workers who have always been the backbones of our community, and particularly in the last year, right, have had to carry so much burden. And so, I think I want to just lift up those intersections, and that is where we see like the most impact of the system, right? And why we need to change policies and change what's happening at the system, right? And that this system that we have experienced anti-Asian racism through is the same system, right? That then again last night, murdered another Black person, right? And I think even today, to be sitting here talking about anti-Asian racism, we have to acknowledge that, and also, we have to find ways to build bridges and build across our communities, because we know that the change we need is big, and it will impact and benefit all of us, right, in the end. And I think the work that, ARW has been doing, and Chinese Progressive Association, and all of the other groups we work with through the Asian Pacific Islander Civic Action Network really is about creating a space to move forward policy and solutions that impact all of our Asian communities, which are extremely diverse, right? And include many different experiences, as well as other communities of color and working class communities, because we know that the kind of, equitable recovery we're talking about, housing for folks, good paying jobs, immigration reform, that these will benefit all of us, and we need to work together. So, I think the work we've done is really around, for us, it's mostly about building the capacity and power of young people and young adults across the diversity of the Asian community and supporting work in Vietnamese immigrant refugee communities. But, we see it as part of this broader Asian, a group of Asian organizations and broader groups of organizations and communities of color, because, the way things manifest might look different, but ultimately the roots are the same.
And speaking of young folks, I want some of the students to jump in on that. I think as an adult, you're obviously experiencing one way, but as a teenager, as a sophomore in high school, as a junior in high school, what is that? How did the events of Atlanta reach you all, and how are you processing that? And I know Andrew and Linda and Samip, you guys are on here too, so jump in here.
I can start off and share my point of view on it. I'm a sophomore in high school, so the way I see it, is definitely different from in a way an adult would see it. The world, the way I live in, and the perspective I see, it's completely different. And I'm Chinese American, and I have a mother and 2 sisters. And seeing the shooting in Atlanta was extremely painful for me, because this is the world that my family has to live in. And the fact that my mother and my 2 sisters, might be targeted because of their race and because they're women is really, really, shocking. I have a 6-year-old sister, and, she's going to have to grow up through all of this. And, and she has to be taught, to protect herself. She has to be taught that, people might target her because of what she looks like and where she's from. That's super, super scary for me, trying to, be a good older brother and try to protect her and try to be, there for her and, in every way I can. With all these problems, the AAC, the Asian American Coalition at Arlington High School, has been very active. We held a rally recently to discuss all of these issues and to talk about how we can fight this racism in Arlington and in Arlington High School. And something else that we're doing is we're also trying to work on a new curriculum for school to teach more AAPI history, so people can, have more, be more aware of it, and also build, better empathy for the AAPI community, so they understand, more races and more cultures, and understand the injustices that have been happening for a very long time, because they have been happening for a very long time. But students are not taught that, and it leads to more hate because we constantly repeat the mistakes of our past. That's just something that the AAC at AHS is doing.
I want to ask, how do traditional Asian stereotypes play a role in this narrative around these hate crimes, these murders, and how does a lack of education about the Asian American experience play a role here? And Karen, I'll start with you, because I know you have some background info on here. You've sort of prepared about that.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about, the demographics of Asian Americans. Hold on one second. Let me try to share the screen. It doesn't let me select what to share, but let's find out. Is it sharing? No. I can't share it. Hold on. But let me just talk about it for a sec. If, so the invisibility, right, of Asian Americans, in the US, it's really, really some of the stereotypes are really like, well, we're a model minority. Asians are doing well. They're the better minorities. So we need to look to them as a model. But when in fact, in the Asian American community, it's very diverse. Although a lot of times people refer to Asians as Chinese looking, right? Or East Asian looking. Right. So that's, and that's kind of part of this whole like invisibility, and that they're doing well. But when in fact, the income bracket, if you just look at Massachusetts, it's very much like a U. So you have a lot of well-to-do, and you also have a lot of low-income folks, and a lot of low-income folks are very low income. So it's very hard for us to make a case what the community is needed because it's so broad. And then also there's and within, the Asian American community is very diverse, right? You have South Asian, East Asian, but we often get, clumped together, and often we're seen as foreigners, that we don't belong here. And it actually rooted in policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act, that actually the policy that actually would say that Chinese, here doesn't have a right. And so because of that, that actually impacted the Asian American communities for many, many years. If you look around the country and you say, why are there Chinatowns everywhere? Was because, Chinese American had no access to resources. So the community has to come together for mutual support and support each other. And that's why the, enclaves of Chinatowns, it's formed. And then, in Massachusetts, the Chinese American community is also very diverse. I think the experience in the suburban area, and the urban area sometimes is very different. And I would say that actually Chinese Americans in terms of income, in Boston, it's the lowest amongst, people of color, and often people don't know that. And we'll see, what the census say for this year, because a lot of people are dealing with displacement, have probably had been forced out of Boston. So we'll see what the data says, in the latest census. And then also in terms of career, like where are jobs, right, for Asian Americans? You have very highly educated, skill work, and very low wage workers. So the nail salon workers, the home care workers, the restaurant workers, the hotel workers like Carolyn talked about, are the ones that we feel like is the most important for us to support, mainly because we feel like, if we talk about progress in society, if the most vulnerable are rising, then we're all rising together. If we just pick the middle and do something about it, so we'll forever have this, right, gap, that, the achievement gap. So for us, it's really important, to really lift up the most vulnerable. And lastly, we think that it's also important, as part of the invisibility of Asian American communities, there's not enough information on all of us. And that's why all of us are also fighting for the data equity bill, to make sure that we actually have useful data, and actually, that will help us understand the diversity of the community, and we actually tackle it, in a way that's effective.
I know, Sam, you and I have had conversations about, this, because of the lack of the institutional knowledge, because of the lack of the historical knowledge around Asian Americans, sometimes that's used as a wedge in other communities of color. And then it makes the conversation so much more difficult to get to an equitable place. So I wonder if you could expand upon kind of what Karen was saying, but also that piece as well.
Sure. When I kind of think about the way that the narratives have been shaped around the Asian American community, I think about three kind of pillars. I think of the yellow peril, I think of the perpetual foreigner narrative, and I think of the model minority myth. And specifically to this question, I'm going to focus on the model minority myth and the way that it was used as a justification for anti-Blackness, that this country pitted the Asian community versus the Black community, and that even in our own oppression, we are an afterthought. And it's I think a lot of just historical context that needs to be understood, where we're not taught proper Black history in this country. We're not taught the proper Asian American history in this country. People don't know about the struggles of how what the Asian community has gone through, or just how diverse we are. Right, we're not a monolithic community. We have dozens of different countries that are represented here. We speak multiple dozens of languages. And if you don't take that and contextualize it, and you're just simply looking at it in a broad stroke of a brush, you're going to miss out on a lot of the ways that you understand and interpret what's going on within the community. And as Karen was saying, from a data standpoint, like we have the largest racial wealth gap. We are the fastest growing racial demographic. There's so many different needs and complexities within the Asian community, and we need data. You need to disaggregate that data. And if you're not properly looking at our community, how could you possibly serve the community? And if we're really talking about the government stepping up and doing what it needs to do, it is to take care of its most vulnerable. And therefore, we need to be listening and passing legislation that actually is going to give you the outlook and the understanding perspective to be able to best service those people. And so and that goes for not just the Asian community, the Black community is not monolithic, the Latinx community is not monolithic. So it's not just that we were fighting for data disaggregation for the Asian American community, but for all communities, because we really do need to make sure that everyone's voices are not just at the table, but actually being serviced in the way that they need it.
Carolyn, I'd love for you to jump in here, because I was thinking about, as you were talking about working, with the nail techs and things like that, and folks that are, and I'm thinking about, as we talk about narratives, I think about the fetishization of Asian women, and this, and the misconception around the history, just the ignorance around the history, and all of the cultural stereotypes in that space as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, just want to lift up kind of what Karen and Sam said. I think that's right. Asian communities, we, like all of our communities, we get these multiple stereotypes, multiple ways we're racialized that then, don't quite fit on each other, but then people use, as it's convenient, right, to perpetuate the way things go. And, I think a lot of the work I do in Fields Corner is with the Southeast Asian community. So folks who came here as refugees of the war after 1975. And yeah, when we talk about incomes, Vietnamese and Cambodian communities who were part of those refugee waves, have very low incomes. And yeah, that, as Sam said, that's very much erased in the conversation around data, around the Asian American community and data. And so that's part of the reason we feel like it's so important to have data equity. And yeah, I think that there's a lot to say, right? When we talk about massage parlor workers, when we talk about nail salon workers, when we talk about home healthcare workers, domestic workers, that, there's certain work that we've devalued as a society because we've seen it as feminine, right? We've seen it as women's work, the work of the home. And, who is it who ends up taking on that work? It's women of color, immigrant women, limited English speaking women. And so, I think that and when we see those same industries in predominantly predominantly white spaces where there are those industries, we know this, they charge like 4 times as much. I mean, many of us have been to nail salons. We know the difference in what prices are, right? And that's real. So, we think about just this intersection of race and gender in terms of, what kind of work is valued at all. And then within that, whose work gets seen as valuable and whose doesn't, right? And I think that's what we see in Atlanta, and that's what we see across industries here in Massachusetts. And these are women who are still going to work every day, while many of us get to be home on Zoom. They're taking the train, they're commuting, and they're facing these harassment issues, right, as they're trying to go to work. And I think that just to bring it back to education, I think it's also that, how do we highlight within our Asian American studies conversation, all of the different Asian experiences, right? Including South Asian folks who have experienced increased Islamophobia, whether or not they are Muslim, since 9/11, right? Southeast Asian communities, as we said, who came here as refugees of the war, have a little bit of a different experience of immigrating and being here. And now we're seeing many of them getting deported back to the countries they may have hardly ever lived in. And then, even the disparity and the polarization of income in Chinese communities, that all of this is part of our story. And how do we create a story that includes all of these parts and create a narrative that really highlights where we are united and also like the specific experiences of different parts of our community. And I think there's a lot of opportunity through the curriculum you all are making in Arlington. I was thinking about there's a group of students in Andover, there's a group of students in Sharon, in Boston, there's a lot of conversations. And so how do we I think it's a really exciting opportunity for young people to lead and for us to start building that education across generations, across languages, and doing that work.
And I would love to bring in a few of the students. I know, Linda, you can chime in. as well to talk about, do you experience that in the hallways of the high school? You know, this idea of the model minority myth that, you know, you're good in math, or you're you know, a perfect student and things like that, when maybe that's not your jam. And I'm curious to know what your experiences are.
Yeah, sure. So definitely in high school, what I've noticed is a lot of our history curriculum and history and English curriculum, there's quite a lack of representation for the API community, and also misrepresentation in a certain degree in terms of educating students on our culture, and the books and literature that we read are not written by members of the AAPI community, and there's definitely this lack of representation that could cause some misunderstanding. And definitely in the halls, I haven't experienced as much, but there's kind of a sense that, oh, maybe like because she's Chinese American, so of course she's good at math, of course she's like quote unquote smart, and sometimes it is a little bit disheartening to know that maybe that is the only characterization I have, or that is the only trait people see me with.
Yeah, Andrew, chime in here.
Yeah, I also want to talk about stereotypes and how they really affect us. As an Asian American, with the model minority myth, the perception that, Asian Americans are super smart and successful, right? And like as a high school student, that really, like affects me personally, because when I'm seen as just smart, I'm just seen as well off, I'm honestly being like dehumanized. Like I'm just seen as a smart person. I could be good at basketball and like suck at school, right? But then no one would know that because I'm just assumed to be smart, and it gives me this pressure that I need to be smart, that I need to work hard, that I need to fulfill this myth and this, being smart. But when in actuality, like I don't need to have that pressure, and this pressure it puts on us is really um it's hard to deal with, because you feel like you really feel the need, and you honestly push yourself at night to study, to pull those long nights so you can be seen as a smart one, right? And it also affects, the Bhutanese and Cambodian population and other South Asian populations, where, a lot of those, immigrants aren't as successful, with 80% of the Cambodian and Bhutanese population being, having low proficiency in English, and also 20% of Asian Americans who are not citizens, who are citizens, which also doesn't include citizens, are living in poverty. Like this myth that we are rich and successful is truly hurting the Asian American community, because all of these people who are struggling are not getting the recognition they need because we're just seen as successful. And it really hurts our community. And like another myth, like the docility myth about, Asian women, and how it like ties into the recent Atlanta shooting, right? How Asian women are seen as, quiet and, submissive and, unassertive, right? It makes them easy targets for, hate crimes. As like 7% of AAPI hate crimes are against women, right? Like you see all of these stereotypes that are constantly hurting the Asian American community. And like this fetishization is like, it's been around for a long time, since like the 1950s, when there was war in Asia, and, American soldiers would go into, Asian, prostitute shops, and they would like get this like idea that, Asian women were like docile, right? And that they're like prostitutes. And that's why like when the idea traveled to America, this idea just, spread around, and it's what it is what it is today. And so with all of these stereotypes, the API community is constantly hurting. And like with Linda and, with my family, like Asian women, like they're constantly being hurt by these stereotypes. And I feel like in school, these injustices and stereotypes aren't taught. It's kind of ironic that we celebrate Lunar New Year in high school, but we don't learn any API history, right? How, like, isn't that really funny? Like, why don't we learn about the injustices, right? With COVID right now, we didn't learn about the bubonic plague outbreak in San Francisco in the 1900s, where literally Chinatown was boxed in by the military, not letting any Asian Americans leave because they were suspected of having the bubonic plague. But now we see it's repeating again with COVID-19 and all of these Asian Americans being hate crimed. You see how it's ironic how like it's just not being taught. It's really ridiculous, and we're truly hurting from it as an AAPI community.
I'm curious, and it sounds like, Andrew, you took it upon yourself to really get educated in this particular space. I want to ask, the grown-ups here, us grown-ups here on the panel, what do you, when you hear Andrew and Linda talk so passionately about their experience in high school now, what comes to mind for you all?
Well, I just really, really appreciate that the young people are actually pushing for Asian American studies. I think that's really important because I think it is forgotten history. It's important for us to know. And I think also too, history, written, right? There's only certain people could write the history. So that there's a reason why there wasn't a whole lot of written history. So actually, I work for the Chinese Progressive Association now, although, high school for me was like, 30, years ago, 20 change and 30 years ago. But the reason actually I work for the Chinese Progressive Association now was because I was part of the youth program in 1997, really to learn about, Chinese American history, but also the history of Chinatown. So I think Chinatown was seen as, these like, right, we go there for dim sum and restaurants, but what's forgotten is actually the people who live upstairs of the restaurant. And there's also a long history or struggle that people were part of. People actually, fought for, the stability that we have, the community we have today, but it was not, recorded. It was not, it's not written, but now finally we have more Asian Americans, who are writing about it. And Michael Liu just actually, wrote a book on Forever Struggle. It's about, Chinatown's history. So I think that, it's important, for us to push for more and say, hey, you know what, we want to know a history. And I think that also, as someone who, I immigrated to the US when I was 10, and like everyone else, I got picked on. And initially I thought it was because I didn't speak English. And it wasn't just that. When I spoke English, I still have some of the similar experience. I think what's important is that when we find or face this injustice, it's important for us to think about collectively, what can we do, in the community? I think personally, we can feel like a lot of things but I think collectively, how can we address some of the issues together as a community, right? To find, friends who are facing the same thing, just like what you guys are doing, what a lot of students are doing now is really trying to, let's fight for, Asian American studies. And actually there is a legislation before us that, for the legislators to vote on whether or not you will, actually fund, because it's one thing to say that we'll do this, but, if you really support it, you put your money where your mouth is, right, to fund this. So I think it's really important for us to, I think that it is a very difficult time for a lot of us, but it's also for us to really, think about, some of the resistance and some of the, victories we had together as a community as well, that we also need to honor, because we also stand on the shoulders of the people who come before us. And I think that, some of the stuff, for us to go to college, not too long ago, people weren't able to go to college. So.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, I feel like I totally agree with Karen. It's like building on the legacy and the history of Asian American organizing communities of color. And as I was saying before, I think this is a real moment where there are young people and older people, but across the state, right, that are having these same conversations. And so I think we saw that this weekend with a bunch of actions. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to build across, right? Like we have to focus on our blocks, our schools, our, towns, but also like there's so much opportunity, right? Like I was saying earlier, like with all these other cities and towns where folks are having similar conversations, how do we build those bridges? Because it is ultimately around us all, doing our part, but making kind of this bigger change at the state level and obviously, more broadly. So I feel like there's so much excitement, or there's so much potential right now for us to really be building a movement across the state and even even specifically on this piece of ethnic studies and Asian American studies, right? And so I think it's really exciting. And there's a lot of opportunity, and hope we can start to create those bridges and those connections.
Yeah, before I jump in, I just wanted to make sure, see if Sein wanted to actually say something, given you're the advisor, and then I'll
do it. Jump in, absolutely.
Yeah, as English is not my first language, so I'm being very quiet and listener. Like for Spanish and Korean, I can talk tons. But many thoughts are actually in my mind, and I actually came to the United States as age of 25. And when I was preparing for visa whole process, I heard that will be hard to get a visa as a 25 years old Korean woman. I didn't know what that means, but now I see that there is a stereotype, and now I decide to live in the US with my family, my husband. I didn't know that what I'm signing up for. There is a many lack of conversation before. This is actually my first time. Like I started teaching in Arlington for 3 years ago. I have been speaking Spanish whole time because I was not engaged in this deep, important conversation. And now I'm seeing that this tragedy incident actually pushed me to be a more responsible educator. How can I address this conversation into my Spanish curriculum? And actually, I'm starting some research with my colleague that how can we integrate Asian Latinx culture in Spanish curriculum, because US is not the only country that has an immigrant population. And I want to bring this into my class so the students can have that space and really deep discussion while we are practicing Spanish. I want to invite my students to see the world, how other countries are doing, how they are integrating Asian immigrant population into their country, and how we are contributing to the society. Thank you, Sam.
I don't know if it was the Korean connection, but I felt like there was something powerful that was coming. So I think when I've been listening to the students today, and just kind of young people in general, like I feel this immense amount of pride, because I know there was a great rally this weekend led by youth activists, and I think it's this notion and this belief that they're not going to take it anymore. It's unacceptable, the treatment and the environment that is very violent towards Asian community. And for me, when I think back to when I was in high school, I was not a good student, quote unquote. I had a 2-point-something GPA, graduated undergrad with a 2.38 GPA, and I was someone who really wanted to excel in sports. That was what I was passionate about. That was where I found joy, but the amount of difficulty and challenges of racism that I had to endure, and that was not why my mom immigrated to the country. She came here off the buying into the fake promise of the American dream, the one that actually doesn't exist for people that look like us, and watching her having to raise her children on her own, and as a small business owner, and having to really endure what she went through. And so as I grew up, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, how can I contribute? And you realize very quickly that you can't do it by yourself, that you do need community, and you do need multi-generations to come together. You do need to build that cross-community solidarity, and understand that, we can only do it when we do it for each other, and we can only do it by lifting up and amplifying those who are most impacted and vulnerable. And I think, for me, I think about as a man, how I can be, what kind of space I'm taking up, and how I'm acting based off of my privileges, and really understanding and unlearning a lot of things, but also realizing that, the women and the queer folk and the femmes have really been doing all the work, and it's time that, I checked myself and really just started educating myself. And that's why I'm like super honored to be here alongside, Carolyn and Karen and and all the work that they're doing, but also especially for the young people that are here as well.
I want to answer some questions that we've gotten in the Q&A here. And one question I have here is from a community member, Deepa Barath, and I apologize if I pronounced your last name wrong, but Deepa asks, the model minority myth also ignores artists, poets, and musicians and their contributions. How can the community, schools, and larger Arlington arts partners celebrate and share this more intentionally? And I'm not sure if any of you all have an idea about in the art space here.
Oh, you want to go, Andrew? Go.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in about how with our Eurocentric curriculum, it's really hard to suddenly integrate these artists, poets, musicians, and their contributions to school. But something that has been actively done is that the Arlington Racism Working Group of Arlington High School, the history department, and a bunch of English teachers at Arlington High School have been getting together to try to teach more Asian American authors. For example, I think the English teachers are thinking about piloting a new book called When the Emperor Was Divine. It's a really good book, about World War II, I'm pretty sure. And I think there's quite a bit of efforts right now that the school is putting in to sharing more, API history and artists and poets and musicians, and just adding more culture into it. That's what I see from my personal experience and seeing what the school's doing.
Yeah, and I was just going to add in more broadly, I think, so ARW is also the sponsoring organization for the Boston Asian American Film Festival, and we've done various arts and culture projects. And I think what's exciting to me is how can we use creative methods to really highlight the stories of our communities, the challenges our communities are facing, the resilience and strength in our communities, and the diversity, right, as we've been talking about tonight, of our communities. And so I think like Andrew's saying, there's many avenues of types of creative practice to do that. But I think that's right, that we have to create joy and inspiration in our work to make change, and using arts and using and art that's created by people who are most impacted by the issues is such an important part. And so I think there's lots of amazing books, films, other pieces that can be used. And also there's so much opportunity to create more and to tell more of our stories, and for that to be invested in.
I think we could have artists actually just, undiscovered. And I think when we're talking about art, right? And I think that actually it could be just a contest of something people can display, and you can find the artist in you, right? And I think that, that's also something that it may not be someone who's, famous, but, uncovering someone's artistic talent is just as important. And so I would say that, look to your neighbors, look to your friends, actually. Maybe there's many talented students in, Arlington High, that's homegrown, just haven't been discovered. And that's, and I think that whatever we're working towards, a better society, all the ways that you can to build community, it's really important. I think, Sam was being humble. And I think that, actually we all have a role in a society. It doesn't have to be the same, but we all have a role. And as long as our aim is like, for us to be, at a better place, not just for our own, but for everybody. That's something for everybody. And that's important. That's what we, when we're talking about, a better world be possible. It is possible if we can think for others.
This question is from an anonymous attendee. They want to thank everyone for sharing. They ask, are there ideas on how to discuss these ideas within the AAPI community and within our own families to inform older generations that might not share these anti-racist ideas about learning for Black, Indigenous people of color history, and more focused only succeeding at school and career. So it looks like, how do you have these intergenerational conversations? And what's the best way to go about that?
I think of a lot of the really great work that came out of that, first was inspired by, Black liberation movement and Black Lives Matter activists. And there was letters for Black Lives that was basically Asian Americans who wrote letters to their family members, to our community members, and it was translated into the various languages that we speak for folks maybe English isn't their first language, to really start to engage in that conversation. And it's a challenge, right? And I think for folks who learned that history, learned the true history of this country and the oppression and the way that white supremacy has permeated all parts, every corner of this country, there's this understanding and learning and having seen that. But we also have to recognize that for many members of our family, in our community, they've never had access to that. They're too busy trying to survive, trying to put food on the table just to literally get us to the next day. And so there needs to be some of that grace of for us to do the work within our community, to have that patience with them, to keep on every day, pound one foot in front of the other, right? And just continue to have that conversation as challenging as it is, but also recognizing that we also have a lot of learning to do as well. And I think something that's been constantly brought up is that intersection and understanding that, and that our struggles are not separate, but actually one that is directly tied to one another. And so for me, I think it's continued to have the conversation with the understanding that that we should not be pitted against one another, that there is space for all of us, that there is enough, that we shouldn't be in this scarcity mindset, and just really having empathy for one another. And so I agree. I think there is definitely hope, and I think sometimes in the middle of the storm, when everything is happening and the struggle is real and you feel it, it's really hard to see and feel the progress that we've made, or to feel hope sometimes when it just seems like it's one bad thing after another. But I think if we kind of take a step back and understand and see how far we've come, we'll understand that and see just how much building has really happened, and how much hope that we can actually have in the work that's already being done and will be done.
We're getting a lot of questions about Asian inclusive curriculums in school, legislation seeking more Asian inclusive curriculum, what's being taught at AHS, and the efforts there. Are there efforts on the state level, or even, if we're talking about Greater Boston level, to include that in state curriculum? And if so, what's that momentum look like right now?
So right now, I think one of the sponsors, Senator Jason Lewis, is actually asking for, to have Asian American studies in K to 12, but also in higher education as well. And the legislation has been filed. It's going to get assigned to a committee. And I think that in a second, I'll put it on the chat, what the bill number is. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But I think that, while we're fighting for this, right? And I think what would also be important to happen is for actually, there are going to be generational differences, right? And I think that Carolyn said earlier, injustice manifests differently, based on a race, gender, right, and age, and race as well. So it's really important for us to understand that, what is like, injustice, for someone else. And then I think that, some things, also are rooted in misunderstanding. And I think that, if we commit to community building, it's really, then we can actually kind of resolve some of the differences. And I think that the community can always come together and say, this is a problem. How are we going to resolve it together, and to have ownership on it? And so I think that, so I think that, understanding, how racism shows up differently for different people. And sometimes, that misunderstanding can be resolved if we have the will to do so. Thank you, Carolyn, for putting the bill on the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to copy paste it for the attendees right now. Another question that came to us from the community is, what can community members do who may not have a position of power, may not be an elected leader or anything like that, but what can they do to help support and empower Asian Americans in their neighborhoods and in general?
Yeah, Andrew?
I would say like the first step to empowering the AAPI community is to understand and educate yourself first on all of these issues and to, fix any implicit biases that you might have. And then I think the next step is if you notice any of your friends and family, are openly racist or, have any implicit biases, and to really have a conversation with them and try to educate them, because oftentimes, racism is just from ignorance. And if people can truly understand what's happening and, develop better empathy with other cultures, this racism would go away. And also you can also go to, many public events that might be happening in Arlington, or, elect officials who have policies that, support the AAPI community.
And Samip, why don't you jump in here, because I let you sit in the back of the class for this whole discussion. And so now tell me about what you think could do, or what folks in the community here could do to help you feel more supported.
Yeah, like Andrew said, a big part of it is educating yourself and educating your loved ones and people that are close to you, because you might see it in your close circles, and it's important to address it because, first of all, being a bystander, whoever it is wrong. You should be an ally and stand up for these injustices. But like I said, not just for people that you don't know, but for people that you know, because they will listen to you because you're close to them, and you can have an impact in your own circles and to your loved ones, because they'll listen to you more than, a stranger. But also just attending these events and attending, like the rally that happened last weekend, or the one we had at Robbins Farm Park, and, joining these discussions and really trying to do your part in, helping raise awareness, and just doing everything you can to fight these injustices.
I'm interested, Sein, do you feel like you would have the support in the academic setting in the school to be able to incorporate Asian American history, Asian history, as you were speaking to earlier?
I don't know that is there any existing support yet, but definitely if we raise the our voice, and if we request that we want to do this, we want to bring this to classroom, definitely there will be our supporters. And just our goal as an educator, we want to create an inclusive learning environment for every student, like those students who identify themselves as Asian American, they can see the schools will change something for them, and they can be more participating in these existing affinity groups, and they can start the conversation. I think we are at the stage that we want to change, and I think it will come more.
Excellent. Well, I want to respect everyone's time, and it is a school night, but I want each one of you on this panel to, I guess, any thoughts that maybe you had while listening to each other that you wanted to share, or anything that you want folks in the community to walk away from this conversation holding in space, to contemplate, to learn, to observe. And Sein, you can start, since I'm looking at you right now in speaker mode.
I will come back.
Okay, that's fine. Karen, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
So I think that this is an important start of a conversation, and it is so much more that conversations to be have. And I just want to encourage everyone that sends, that right now, Asian American community has the spotlight, and we really want to make sure that especially our young people are engaged in long-term struggles. And I hope that, we'll all support things that people will live a dignified life, so that, when all the people's everyday needs are met, it's so much easier for us to address, societal issues. So I hope that we can, continue, to work together. And some of it, could be through culture and art, community building. And next month is Asian American Heritage Month. I think I'm going to be excited to see, what Arlington will do to celebrate Asian American Heritage Month.
Yeah, I think building off what Karen was just saying, for me, I've been thinking a lot around how, yes, we want to stop Asian hate, but actually we also want to build a different future, right? And I think, what everyone shared about what's happening at Arlington High School is one example of how we start to build a different future, right? And so I just think that as we think about what we want to stop, we also think about what we want to build in every city and town across the state, and collectively, right? That centers the people most impacted. And so, I just hope we both stand up against violence and against the most egregious acts, and we push for a future where, as Karen said, everyone can live a dignified life, where folks have language access, we have adequate data about people, and people's basic needs are met.
There's really not much to say after both Karen and Carolyn went. I think they really covered all the bases, and I think just wanted to continue to encourage the young people that are here to stay engaged, tap in with the community groups that are within the community, and to those who are asking a lot of the questions, like keep asking those questions, keep on pushing for more resources, keep on pushing for leaders to be held accountable, when they say something that, they actually follow through on it. And it's time that, it wasn't just lip service. There was a question, that I was thinking about, like, politics, and it's not just one party or the other party that's, any more egregious. For me, it's more of like all the leaders collectively. I'm not looking to place blame. I'm looking literally for, like, I just want leaders to actually follow through on what they say they're going to do. Don't bring people to the table and say that I want to hear you, and then follow through on like 1 out of the 10 legislative, requests, right? Like, actually follow through on all of them. Don't just have a press conference, don't just show up to a rally and hold up a sign that says stop Asian hate and think that you did anything. Don't just, pass a resolution and think that, anything happened. It's actually listening to the leaders within our community that actually have solutions and have been saying them for a long time, and actually including them in the decision-making process. And then also continue to encourage young people to keep on fighting, to keep on pushing. And I think we're going to get to where we need to get to collectively.
Before I say anything, I just want to say that I'm just super happy, proud that we could all get together to have a conversation, have a discussion about these issues, and be able to come up with strategies to combat, racism. That's the first step, to combating AAPI racism. And I think piggybacking off of what Sam said, with systematic racism, you need systematic efforts to fight it. You can't just show up to one thing and then not go to another, hold up a sign, think you're doing something right. I think it's super important that if you're going to commit to, stopping AAPI hate, that you commit to it all the way, that you support, an organization that's actually doing something, that you try to do something yourself and you try to educate others. So I think that's super important.
I think it's really heartening to see all these actions being taken in like the adult world, and like as a student at AHS and part of AAC, we try best to also educate people as much as possible. We've made presentations to present to our entire school, and through social media, we make infographics to share this information and educate others on issues that are occurring. And so I think definitely education is a big takeaway as well.
Yeah, I think the work we're doing with the Asian American Coalition at school is super important. We never had as far as I'm aware, like a group for activism for Asian Americans at our school. And we decided to start it this year because, I mean, just because of the recent hate crimes and just, with Andrew and I and Linda, our experience with racism and discrimination in our lives. We've all talked about how, growing up, it's affected us and, made us feel like something was wrong with us because of the way we look. And it's really important to teach the youth even younger than us, starting maybe even in elementary school, teaching kids that it's okay to be who you are and you should be proud and of who you are and comfortable in your own skin.
I want to say that this conversation is not going to be the one time. This is the beginning. I hope this lasts long, and I will make sure my student group, Asian American Coalition, will keep up their energy to invite and include many students and community, and we'll be around. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for holding space with us. I do want to mention, I tried to answer as many folks in the chat as I could about things that are being planned in Arlington and certain demographic information specific to Arlington. And so all of that information we will post to our social media sites, Arlington Human Rights on Instagram and on Twitter as well. This particular recording of this panel will be on our YouTube channel, Arlington Human Rights, so that you can rewatch it, you can share it with your friends and family, and I encourage you to absolutely do so because there was such a wealth of knowledge that really I think we also need to sit with and break down and unpack for ourselves. I do want to mention before we let you all go that this Thursday, April 15th at 7 p.m., the DEI office, Jill's office, and the Friends of the Robbins Library are holding an event and a conversation as well, talking about these particular issues with Gwendolyn Wong as well. So we can post that information on our social media and on our website, arlingtonhumanrights.org. But for now, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us here in conversation. And, let's continue this fight. Have a great night, everyone.